welcome to an algebra tutorial video learning about linear equations and perpendicular lines. So I wanted to go over a common type of problem that you'll see as you're working your way through an algebra class and understanding how lines compare, writing equations, perpendicular lines, all that good stuff. Here's the problem. So write an equation for a line perpendicular to the equation y equals negative 4x plus 5 that also goes through point negative 10, 0. So let's draw a picture of what we got going on here, make sure we're visualizing this thing. So if I graph this equation, it's in slope-intercept form, so I can tell that plus 5 means my y-intercept is at plus 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to make my point there. And then the slope is negative 4. So when I go over 1, I go down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let me go ahead and draw a line. And there we go. That's our given equation. However, I want to write an equation for a line perpendicular to that. So I got to understand perpendicular. I'm going to write that over here. Make sure I get all my criteria. My line has to be perpendicular. And it has to go through point negative 10, 0. So I'm specifically constrained by that point. And if we draw a picture of that, so negative 10, 0, that negative 10 is my x value, so I go left 10 and up 0. So my line has to go through that point, and if I'm just going to make a rough estimate, my equation, if it's perpendicular, it's going to form a 90-degree angle to the blue line, so it's going to look something like this. So already I can kind of make some assumptions here. Just from graphing and visualizing this, my y-intercept is probably going to be around 3 or 4. My slope is going to be a positive slope because this one has a negative slope. And it gives me kind of a target to shoot for when I'm writing my equation. All right, so let's get into some more of the algebra aspects here. Let's review perpendicular line. Perpendicular means if I'm comparing slopes of perpendicular lines, perpendicular means they have to be negative reciprocals of each other. So if the first line, my original line, has a slope of negative 4, the negative reciprocal of that means my new line has to have a slope of positive 1/4. So I have to think about when I have negative 4, when I have a whole number, I have to think about it as over 1. So the reciprocal, 4 goes on the bottom, 1 goes on the top, and then I just make it positive. So my new line has to have a slope of 1/4. That has to be true to make sure they're perpendicular. So I know my slope now, and we've got our point that we also have to go through. So I think the easiest thing to do to write an equation would be to use point-slope form. So let's jot that down, make sure you remember that. So point-slope form uses a point in the slope, and it fits this format here. And if you're rusty on point-slope form, I have a few videos back in the series you can watch all about point-slope. But anyways, it uses an x1 and y1 value. So there's my x1 and y1 for my specific point. And it uses my slope m, and we can just substitute values in to get a point-slope form equation. So let's do y minus y1, the y value, so I'm going to put 0, equals a slope of 1/4, I'm going to put that in for m, times x minus the x value that I go through my point, which is negative 10. Okay, at this point I can stop. I have an equation for perpendicular line. We know it's going through that point because we used it. We know it has that slope because we used it. But let's go ahead and simplify things down a little bit and see what it is in slope-intercept form. So I'm going to do a little bit of algebra. Y minus 0 is nice. That's just y. Let's distribute the 1/4. So 1/4 times x. These two negatives are going to make it plus 10, and then 1/4 of 10, I'm just going to write it as 10 over 4. But that simplifies down into y equals 1/4. Oops, I forgot my x. X plus 10/4 reduces down to 5/2. I want to make it a simplified fraction. So there we go. So if I want to graph this thing exactly, I know it's going through that point. I know 5/2 is the y-intercept, that's 2.5. So it looks like when I did my rough estimate of a line, it was kind of close, but it was a little bit off. And then we go over 4, up 1, 3, 4, over 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just using my slope to make some points. And let's actually sketch the exact perpendicular line. All right, there we are. So perpendicular lines, they cross at 90-degree angles. They have negative reciprocal slopes of each other. So if you're trying to find equations for lines that are perpendicular, you want to really target in on what's the slope. In this case, we learned what's the slope of the line that I'm given. And once I had that, I was able to find the slope of the line that I wanted to create. Hopefully that's a helpful problem for you to kind of see worked out and understanding a little bit better about perpendicular lines.